There was a motel at the intersection of the old highways, long abandoned and almost forgotten. Once this place served as a stop for truckers and tourists, but now it seemed that even the wind avoided its windows, boarded up with old boards. The last records about it in the archives dated back decades ago, when its owners disappeared without a trace. The motel was bought by the new owners, and soon rumors of strange incidents began to attract thrill seekers there. A group of friends, Mike, Sarah, James, and Rachel, chose this place for their next urban legend. They had a tradition of finding old scary places, spending the night there, and recording their impressions. They posted videos on the internet, hoping to gain popularity. This motel was perfect. It was said that people had disappeared here several times. Creepy photos of empty corridors, rusty plumbing, and strange markings on the walls only added to the interest. "This is going to be our best release," Mike announced as they pulled up to the spot. "People love such creepy things. Who knows, maybe we'll even find something interesting. Or someone," Sarah added with a touch of sarcasm. She tried to hide her fear behind jokes, but everyone knew she was uncomfortable. The motel looked even scarier in person. The sagging sign at the entrance barely held on to rusty nails. One of the window panes was broken, and there were strange black marks on its frame. It was quiet outside, too quiet, and apart from the noise of their car, nothing broke the dead silence. James pulled out his camera and started filming. His voice was confident as he said, "Welcome to the scariest place we've ever set foot in. If you're watching this video, it means we survived, or almost survived." "Very funny," Rachel muttered, adjusting her backpack. She was the only one who insisted on taking some protection with her. In her bag was a small knife and a can of pepper spray. They went inside. The air was heavy, saturated with the smell of dampness and something chemical. The floorboards creaked under their feet, creating strange sounds that echoed in the empty corridors. There were several rooms on the ground floor, still furnished with old furniture. "It looks like something was stored here," James remarked, pointing to stacks of cardboard boxes in the corner of one of the rooms. The boxes had handprints left in the dust, as if someone had recently moved them. "Don't you think someone lives here?" Sarah asked, clearly worried. "Come on," Mike waved his hand. "These are just animal tracks. We're the only ones here." But no one noticed a shadow flickering behind one of the windows. They began to explore the building, dividing into two groups. Mike and Sarah went to the second floor, where they were reported to have heard strange noises. James and Rachel stayed downstairs to explore the vault. The second floor was in chaos. The shabby walls were covered with strange scratches, and the floor had caved in places. Mike found an old notebook in one of the rooms. "Look at this," he said to Sarah, opening the cover. "Is this a diary?" Inside were notes written in a scrawled handwriting. Most of the pages were torn or smeared with something red, but one of them attracted attention. "They're watching. Always. Even when you think you're alone, you're not. Don't trust the silence." Sarah swallowed as she read this. "Do you think it's one of the owners?" "What is it?" she asked. "Or another tourist who got too carried away with creepy stories?" Mike shrugged. "Anyway, it's cool. Our subscribers will be delighted." On the ground floor, Rachel and James came across a warehouse. The boxes, which seemed old and dusty to them, were filled with strange objects inside. Old clothes, shoes, and something that looked like personal items. "It's like the stuff of those who lived here," Rachel said, pulling a doll with broken limbs out of the box. James continued filming, his camera capturing everything. He stopped when he noticed a name sticker on one of the boxes. "That name matches what we saw in the missing persons reports," he said. "They said that no one knows where the old owners have gone." There were strange stains on the floor, right under the boxes, dark and ingrained in the wood. "Is that blood?" Rachel whispered, stepping back. "Maybe," James said. His voice trembled. "But why hasn't it dried up completely?" At that moment, a sound rang out. It was as if someone was walking slowly down the corridor. Rachel froze, her hand reaching for the knife. "Who's here?" she shouted. There was no response, but the footsteps continued, getting closer. On the second floor, Mike and Sarah heard it too. They froze, listening. "Are these guys?" Sarah asked. "Maybe," Mike replied, but his voice was uncertain. He pulled out his phone to call James, but the connection was cut off. And then everything changed. The footsteps intensified. A figure appeared in the hallway, but her face was covered. She moved straight towards James and Rachel without making a sound. Rachel grabbed the knife, but at that moment the light went out. The light went out for a split second, but it was enough to throw everyone into a panic. When it turned on again, the figure in the hallway had disappeared, but there were wet footprints on the floor. James slowly lifted the camera, his hand shaking. "What was that?" Rachel whispered, her face turning white. "I don't know," James muttered, trying to stay calm. "Maybe it's someone from the locals? Or another blogger." "A blogger? Seriously? Have you seen these footprints?" Rachel didn't hide her fear. "We need to get out of here." On the second floor, Mike and Sarah were still standing in complete silence. "Did you hear that?" Sarah asked, grabbing Mike's hand. "Yes. Maybe it's just the wind or fallen plaster." Mike tried to calm her down, but his gaze betrayed his anxiety. They moved cautiously along the corridor, lighting themselves with flashlights. Suddenly, Sarah stopped. "Wait, what is this?" She pointed to a door at the end of the hallway. She was wearing a chain with a huge old lock, but the strange thing was that someone had recently tried to rip it off. There were pieces of metal and debris on the floor, as if someone had tried to break open the door with a crowbar. "Someone was definitely here before us," Mike said quietly. "Or still here." He tried to open the door, but the lock held tight. "Forget it," Sarah insisted. "We need to get back to the guys. I have a bad feeling about this." Downstairs, James and Rachel decided to leave the warehouse and return to the central hall to wait for their friends. But on the way, they heard a noise from above. "Mike? Sarah? Is that you?" James shouted, his voice echoing through the building. There was no response, just a sound like muffled thuds. Rachel stopped, listening. "Wait a minute. Do you hear that?" She turned to the stairs. The noise became louder, as if someone was dragging something. No sooner had they agreed than a human-like figure appeared on the stairs. There were bloodstains on her hands, and her eyes. They just stared ahead, expressionless. "Who are you?" James shouted, grabbing a flashlight and pointing it straight at his face. The figure did not respond, but quickened its pace. James grabbed Rachel's hand and they ran. They disappeared into one of the rooms, slamming the door behind them. James quickly propped her up with a chair. "It's just some crazy guy," Rachel whispered, breathing heavily. "We can handle him." But her words were not reassuring. There was a grinding noise outside. Someone, clearly with great strength, was trying to break down the door. Meanwhile, on the second floor, Mike and Sarah discovered something even stranger. In one of the rooms, which was supposed to be closed, they found notes scattered on the floor. Mike picked up one of them. It was an old room rental receipt. There was a date on it, but it was erased by time. The second note was more strange. "They're recording everything. Don't trust the cameras. Leave before it's too late." "It sounds like a warning," Sarah said. But before they could discuss it, there was a deafening crash from the other side of the corridor. Something fell. "We're not alone," Sarah whispered. Her voice was trembling. Mike nodded, grabbing a metal pipe he found along the way. They moved cautiously back to the stairs, hoping to meet James and Rachel. But the stairs were empty, and there were still strange noises below. "They must be here somewhere," Mike whispered. "James! Rachel!" he shouted. but his voice was lost in the echoing silence. Downstairs, James and Rachel were trying to hold the door, but the figure behind it started using something heavy, possibly a crowbar. Every blow shook the door. "We need to get out the window," James suggested, his gaze darting around the room. "Are you crazy? We're on the ground floor, but there might be someone outside too," Rachel objected. James wasn't listening. He opened the window, trying not to make too much noise. "Are you coming with me or staying?" He held out his hand to her. Rachel glanced at the door, which was barely holding up. She reluctantly agreed. "Okay, but be careful." They climbed out the window, ending up in the backyard of the motel. But, to their horror, they discovered that someone had left a car there. The engine was warm, as if it had just been turned off. "We're not alone," Rachel whispered. "Yeah, I noticed that," James replied, trying not to make any noise. At that moment, they heard a scream. It was Mike. "We need to go back for them." Rachel was about to run back, but James stopped her. "Wait, if they're still there, we can ruin them all." "And what do you suggest? Abandon them?" Rachel was angry, but she knew James was. James looked around, trying to find a way out. The abandoned warehouse behind the motel was the only place to hide, but going there seemed like an even bigger mistake. However, it wasn't safe to stay outside either. "We need to find something to protect ourselves with," he suggested, taking Rachel's hand. "Do you even know what you're doing?" She snapped. "It's like a horror movie, only worse. We don't know who these people are or what they want. All I know is that standing still is the surest way to die," James said sharply. They moved cautiously towards the warehouse, listening for every sound. The creaking of branches and the occasional footsteps behind him made the atmosphere increasingly tense. James opened the warehouse door, trying not to make any noise. It was dark inside and smelled damp. Shelves with dilapidated boxes, tools scattered on the floor. There were old fuel cans in the corner. "At least we can hide here," James said, closing the door behind him. "Hide? We have to go back for them." Rachel didn't hide her disappointment. "Look, if we get caught, no one will help. We need to figure out how to get out of here in one piece, and then look for the others." He tried to speak calmly, but his voice betrayed the tension. On the second floor, Mike and Sarah, left alone, tried to find their way back to the first floor, but they were delayed by the sound of heavy footsteps. Someone, obviously big and strong, was approaching the stairs. "Hide," Mike whispered, pushing Sarah into the nearest room. They squeezed into a narrow closet, trying not to make a sound. Through the cracks in the door, Mike saw the shadow of a man. It wasn't James or Rachel. A man in dirty clothes, with a bare torso on which strange scars could be seen, slowly looked around the room. He was holding what looked like a tire iron in his hands. Sarah curled up into a ball, covering her mouth with her palms so as not to make a sound. Mike felt sweat trickle down his back. The footsteps were approaching the closet. The man stopped right in front of him, lifting the tire iron. Mike gripped the pipe in his hands, ready to attack. But suddenly the man turned away and left, leaving footprints on the floor. "We have to get out of here," Sarah whispered. "I agree." "But quietly," Mike replied. James and Rachel found a metal rod and an old wrench. It wasn't the most reliable weapon in their hands, but at least it was something. "If these people are armed, we're finished," Rachel said. "It's better to die trying to defend yourself than just wait," James replied. They left the warehouse and headed back to the motel. As they got closer, they heard a noise inside. Furniture crashing. Screams. It was Mike and Sarah. "Damn, we have to hurry," James said. On the second floor, Mike and Sarah finally got out of the room. But a second man came out to meet them. He was taller than the first, with a rough beard and a look that chilled. "What are you doing here?" His voice was hoarse. Mike raised the pipe, preparing for a fight. "We just got lost. "We don't need any problems," Mike tried to reassure him. But the man just grinned. "You have already found problems since you came here." At that moment, James and Rachel came running around the corner. James slammed the man over the head with a rod. He staggered, but resisted. "Run!" James shouted. All four of them rushed down the stairs, but the first man was already catching up with them from behind. They noticed headlights on the street. It was a car that had been abandoned earlier. Without hesitation, they ran to her. Mike grabbed the door handle, but the car was locked. "Damn, where are the keys?" "Stop it," he shouted. The men were already approaching. James broke the window with a monkey wrench and opened the door. Everyone got inside. "Start it up," Rachel shouted. Mike found the wires under the steering wheel and started trying to start the car, as he had seen in the movies. At the last moment, the engine started up. They took off, leaving their pursuers behind. When they reached the nearest settlement, everyone was exhausted. None of them spoke. They went to the police station to report the incident. But when the police returned to the motel, it was empty. No people, no car, no signs of a struggle. The motel was not listed on the map the officer showed them. The policeman looked around at the companies sitting in the station. Their disheveled hair, torn clothes, and blank stares spoke of a nightmare they had experienced. The officer, a tall man with graying hair, asked several questions, trying to figure out exactly what had happened. "Are you saying that you were chased by two men in an abandoned motel?" he clarified. "Yes," James replied, trying to control himself. "They wanted to kill us. There was a warehouse, old tools, cans. They were armed. We barely got away." The officer nodded and left the room, leaving them alone. A few minutes later, he returned with another man dressed in civilian clothes, who introduced himself as an investigator. He asked a couple of clarifying questions, then said that he would send a patrol to the place where everything happened. "Wait here," the investigator said. "We need time to figure it out." 2 hours later, another officer returned to them, looking embarrassed. "We didn't find anything," he said, sitting down opposite them. "No warehouse, no motel. It looks like you got the location wrong." "What do you mean, they didn't find anything?" "We were there," Rachel exclaimed. "We've seen this place. We almost died." The officer shook his head. "Perhaps the stress caused you to have collective hallucinations," he tried to explain. James slammed his fist on the table. "This is not a hallucination. There were real people who wanted to kill us." The officer looked at them uncertainly, and then handed them something wrapped in a bag. It was a monkey wrench that James used to beat one of the pursuers. There were traces of blood on it. "If this really happened, we need to understand what happened here," he said. "But there is one problem." The officer pulled a photo out of his pocket. There was an old motel on it, exactly the one where it all happened. This motel was demolished 10 years ago. The room froze in silence. "This can't be happening," Rachel said softly. "We were there. It's impossible." "And one more thing," the officer continued, holding out a second package. "We found this in your car." James took the bag and looked inside. There was a rusty pocket knife and a Polaroid photograph. In the picture, all four of them were standing out.